The forest doesn't forget. It keeps no journal, no history carved in stone, but it remembers. It remembers every foot that trespassed its soil, every heart that beat too loudly, every scream that failed to echo back. And long before villages had fences, before maps told people where they could or couldn't go, there were stories whispered beneath the boughs. This one starts with a girl, a hood of red, a path too straight to trust, and a wolf that smiled before it bared its teeth. But don't be fooled by how the tale begins. This isn't about innocence. It's about instinct. She wasn't born wearing red. Once upon a time, she was just a child like any other, eyes wide, hands curious, always asking what was beyond the next hill. She was raised on the edge of the forest, in a crooked little cottage where the windows shivered in the wind, and the hearth never went cold. Her grandmother lived deeper in the woods, too far for comfort, too close for safety. Red loved her, but the journey, it always felt like walking into someone else's breath. The trees leaned in. The moss clung wet and green to her boots. Even the birds seemed to watch with old eyes. She didn't understand it then, but the forest was watching, and the forest chooses. On her 10th birthday, the cloak arrived, woven by her grandmother's hands, red as blood, soft as memory. "Wear this when you walk the woods," her grandmother had said. "It'll keep eyes off you." Eyes? Red didn't ask. She just nodded, wrapped it around her shoulders, and felt its weight settle. Like armor, like warning. From that day on, they called her Little Red. Not because of her name, that was hers alone, a secret kept safe, but because in the woods names give power. And Red, she gave none. It was a morning like any other, except for the silence. The kind that hangs in the air before something changes. Her mother packed a small basket, loaf of sour bread, a sealed jar of pineberry jam, and 2 white candles, the thick kind, the kind that lasts through storms. "She's taken ill," her mother said, tying the lid with string. "She's colder than usual." Red nodded. Of course she did. She had walked the path before, many times, but something about the trees felt different that day, as if they'd grown closer together overnight, as if they knew. Her mother looked her in the eye, a look that said more than words ever could. Stay on the path. The forest didn't wait for her. It never does. It doesn't care who you are, what you carry, how many times you've passed beneath its branches. It only cares how you walk, and what walks with you. Little Red stepped onto the path with the basket tucked in one hand, her red cloak snapping gently in the wind. Not fast, not afraid, just steady. The trees swallowed her within minutes. The light, once warm on the cottage steps, dimmed. Sunlight fractured through the branches above, a flickering patchwork of gold and ash. Birdsong, once lively, gave way to silence. And silence, in these woods, was never empty. It meant something was listening. The path wasn't a road. It didn't carry carts or hooves or wheels. It was a trail barely visible, the kind made by careful feet and habits passed down through generations. She knew every turn, every gnarled root and leaning stone. But still, today felt different. The wind whispered in a new voice. The moss seemed darker. A crow hopped across the trail, pausing just long enough to look her in the eye before flapping off into the deeper wood. She adjusted her cloak, kept walking, and then came the voice. "You walk so fast for someone so small." Red froze. The voice came from ahead, but not clearly. Curled through the trees like smoke. Carried something sweet. Too sweet. She turned, and he stepped from behind a pine, as if the tree had birthed him. Not large, not at first glance. Not snarling or drooling like stories warned. No, he smiled. A long, low, calm kind of smile, like a man might offer to a dog he doesn't trust. His fur was black as cave stone, flecked with gray at the edges. His paws made no sound as he stepped forward. "Don't be afraid," he said with that syrup-thick tone. "I saw your cloak from the hill. Thought I'd say hello." Red's grip tightened on the basket. She didn't step back. "Not yet. You know this is my path," she said. He chuckled. Everyone says that until the trees move. She said nothing. The wolf tilted his head. Where are you headed? To see my grandmother. How kind. He sat, tail flicking. And what does she need that's worth carrying through the woods alone? Red hesitated. Just food. He leaned forward slightly, sniffing the air. Bread. Jam. Something else. His eyes lingered on the basket, then flicked up to hers. Candles. He grinned wider. Storm's not coming. But sickness. That's another kind of darkness, isn't it? Red's heart thudded. The forest felt tighter. I should keep going. Of course, the wolf said, stepping aside, waving a paw as if it were a hand. But maybe take the wildflower trail. Much prettier that way. Quicker, too. She looked at the trail he pointed to, barely a trail at all. Wound around a copse of birch trees and vanished into thick brush. Mother told me to stay on the path. The wolf bowed. Then you must obey. Obedience is such a lovely thing. She walked. The wolf didn't follow. At least, not where she could see. But she knew. The forest no longer sounded the same. A low hum followed her now. The kind you don't hear with your ears, but feel behind your ribs. He had gone ahead, or to the side, or behind, or he had always been there. Red's mind raced. She remembered stories, but none that began like this. None where the wolf smiled. She thought of turning back, but the wind pushed her forward. Branches pulled at her cloak. The moss grew thicker, as if trying to slow her. She walked faster, then faster still, until the cottage's chimney rose between the trees. And there, the smoke. Dark. Too dark. The chimney twisted like a finger through the trees. The stones blackened with time. The door, half-hinged, paint peeling, barely blue anymore, stood open. Not wide, just enough. Just enough to say, come in. Little Red stepped into the clearing. The air here was different. Still, heavier. She didn't smell firewood. She smelled something else. The basket felt heavier now. Not from the bread. Not from the jam. But from the weight of choices. And something else she couldn't name. Grandmother? She called softly, though her voice barely left her mouth. The wind didn't stir. The grass didn't move. No birds sang here. It's Red. I brought. Come in, my child. The voice. Low. Hoarse. Not wrong exactly. But not right. Not quite her. She pushed the door with her fingertips. Creaked not loudly but with memory. The way an old song hums when played again. Inside, the room was dim. The curtains drawn. Candles unlit. Fireplace cold and black. The air smelled like wet fur and earth. And there, in the bed, beneath a mountain of patchwork quilts, a figure, thin, still, back turned toward her. The air tasted like dust. You've come, the voice rasped. Red hesitated. Are you all right? A wheeze. Come closer. I've missed you. She took a step. The boards groaned beneath her feet. The fire should have been lit. Her grandmother always had something cooking. Her hands always moved. This stillness, it wasn't natural. Red placed the basket on the table beside the door. Her eyes didn't leave the bed. I brought bread. And candles. I can light them. No. The voice snapped, then softened. No need. Sit beside me instead. She didn't move. Her eyes adjusted. The head on the pillow was too low. The shoulders too high. The breathing uneven. She stepped forward, slowly, then stopped. What big ears you have. The figure didn't answer at first. Then slowly, to hear you better, dear. Red moved to the foot of the bed. Her eyes narrowed. What big eyes you have. A long pause. To see your lovely face. She reached for the edge of the blanket. What big hands you have. The claws shifted beneath the cover. To hold you close. And then, Red's hand gripped the quilt. She pulled. What big? But she didn't finish. Because the quilt exploded. The wolf reared up, all teeth and shadow. The bed frame cracked. Feathers burst into the air like frightened birds. His eyes, once playful, gleamed now with ancient hunger. To eat you with, he growled. and he lunged. Red didn't scream, didn't faint. She moved. Quick, sharp. The table, the basket, the candles. She grabbed the iron candle holder, thick and sharp-edged, and swung. It hit his shoulder. Not enough to wound, but enough to slow. He snarled, a sound like a landslide. He bounded across the cottage. She ducked behind the hearth, grabbed the broken fire poker, spun, blocked a strike, ducked again. Claws scraped stone. Wood splintered. The wolf leapt again. A crash. From outside, the door slammed open, so hard it flew off its hinge, and a shadow filled the doorway. Broad, muddy, silent. The hunter. The wind didn't blow the door open. Fate did. It came in the shape of a man. Tall, hard-shouldered, dripping with the kind of silence that speaks louder than any roar. A hunter. Not by title. By nature. He didn't ask questions. He didn't scream. He saw the wolf. Mid-lunge, claws outstretched, and he moved. The hunter's boots slammed the floor. He swung the axe. Not wild, not panicked, but like a butcher who knew where every muscle lived. The blade buried itself in the wolf's side. Not enough to kill, but deep enough to send pain howling through every rib. The wolf shrieked. An awful sound. Not just rage. Shock. He hadn't smelled the man. He hadn't known. The predator had misjudged. And predators don't forget that. The wolf staggered sideways, crashing into the table. Jars shattered. Jam bled across the floor. Red crouched behind the hearth, eyes wide, breath ragged. The hunter stood between her and the beast, his axe dripping, his coat torn at the shoulder. But his hands, still, ready. The wolf snarled. But he didn't lunge again. Not yet. He backed toward the shadows, spine low, chest heaving. Then he laughed. Do you think I'm just a wolf? The hunter didn't answer. You think this ends with my blood? With your axe? I've walked longer than these woods have stood. The hunter raised the axe again. I've been here since the first story was told by firelight. Since the first lie wore a smile. Red stepped out from behind the hearth. The wolf turned his eyes on her. You think you're brave now. You think this makes you strong. He grinned wide, blood on his teeth. But the forest remembers. And it always takes back what you steal. The hunter struck again. This time, the blade found the wolf's neck. And this time, the forest did scream. The air split. The wind shrieked through the cracks in the walls. The wolf twisted, howled, collapsed, his body hitting the floor like felled timber. And the cottage went still. The hunter wiped the blade. The axe hissed in the cold ashes of the hearth. Red stood motionless. The room smelled of iron and old fur. The wolf's chest rose once, then didn't again. Then a sound. A whimper. Soft. Muffled. The hunter turned. Red's eyes locked on the wardrobe. She crossed the room in 2 steps. Her hand shook as she touched the handle. Inside, her grandmother, pale, cold, alive, bound and gagged with scraps of her own shawl. Tears spilled the moment Red untied her. They clung to each other, one trembling, one silent, both changed. The hunter stood guard beside the door. He didn't speak. He'd done his part. The fire was lit again. The hunter left before the sun dipped below the trees. He didn't take reward, didn't offer comfort, didn't explain where he came from. He simply nodded once at Red, and was gone. She stayed beside her grandmother until she slept. Then she sat at the fire, staring at the flames, at the poker in her hand, and the red cloak stained now, not from jam, not from mud, but from story, from survival, from truth. She wasn't afraid anymore, but she was no longer the same. Death is not the end of a wolf, not in a story, not in the forest, because legends don't bleed out. They settle in. They soak into the bark, the stone, the breath between branches. And even in silence, they whisper. Her grandmother awoke at dawn. Eyes clear but distant, the kind of look carried by those who've seen too much and survived it. She spoke little. Red didn't push. Some wounds are deeper than words. She fed her broth, lit the candles her mother had packed. The flame seemed to dance longer than it should, as if it knew it had purpose. When the light crept across the windowsill, Red stepped outside. The forest waited. She did not walk the same path home. The straight trail, the one she was told to stay on, felt different now. Narrower. Unfamiliar. The trees leaned lower. She walked slowly, cloak fluttering behind her. Each step a drumbeat of new weight. She'd been told to obey. But obedience hadn't saved her. Instinct had. And something else too. The ability to see. To look through charm. To hear the lie behind the laughter. To understand what most villagers refused to admit. The wolf had spoken truths. Terrible truths. But truths nonetheless. Halfway home, she stopped. Paw prints. Faint but still there, leading away from the trail. Large. Heavy. Real. She knelt. Touched the edge. Not warm. But not yet faded. Had there been two wolves? Or had this one simply walked further than they'd known? The forest gave no answer. Only the wind and the distant snap of a branch. She stood and walked faster. The village was still. It always was in the mornings. Pots clinking, wells echoing, fires being lit. But this morning, the air changed when they saw her. Red. Alone. The cloak darker now. Some stared. Some nodded solemnly. Others looked away, as if her presence reminded them of something buried. Something they didn't want to believe still lived beyond the trees. She passed them all. Straight to her home. Her mother stood in the doorway, hands trembling. She dropped the bundle of herbs in her grip. Ran. They held each other on the porch without words. Just the thudding of hearts. The smell of ash and pine. The feel of a girl who had left as a child and returned as something else. Red didn't explain. She didn't need to. The cloak said everything. She couldn't sleep. The moon slipped across her floor like a ghost. The wolf's voice echoed still. Not in nightmares, but in memory. You think I'm just a wolf? I've walked longer than these woods have stood. I've been here since the first lie wore a smile. Was it all trickery? Or was it truth wrapped in teeth? She didn't know. But one thing was certain. Wolves weren't just beasts. They were symbols. And symbols never die. They just wear new faces. She stepped to the mirror near the hearth. Looked at herself. The red hood. The stained hem. The eyes not wider, not colder, but deeper. Not a girl anymore. Not just red. A guardian of a tale. A keeper of a path. A warning wrapped in wool. Some stories are told. Some are lived. And some are worn like cloaks. Red didn't take hers off. Not after the wolf. Not after the fire. Not even when spring came, when the snow melted and the forest bloomed again. She wore it not for warmth, but for memory, for power, for warning. Because stories are sharper than teeth. And cloaks hold more than thread. They began to speak of her. Not by name, but by color. She walks alone, they'd whisper. Down the same path that took her once to death's door. She speaks to crows, others muttered. She carries iron in her basket, and never looks behind her. Children watched her from fences. Mothers pulled them inside, not out of fear, but out of reverence. The girl in the red cloak had survived the wolf, and that made her more than legend. It made her dangerous. She still carried baskets through the woods, but no longer for jam and bread. Now it held a spool of thick red thread, dried sage and garlic, a blade, short and silver, and a map, drawn in her own hand, of paths the villagers had forgotten. She was no longer delivering. She was watching, hunting. One morning, she returned to the woods, not to visit her grandmother, not to pick wildflowers, not to stray. She followed the second path, the one the wolf had once pointed toward, that narrow track winding through the birch trees, the one he'd called prettier, quicker. She stepped off the main trail, and the forest didn't resist. It welcomed her. The silence here was different, not the stillness of danger, but the quiet of something watching to see what she'd do next. She moved slowly, past crooked roots and split trees, past stones carved with marks she couldn't read, until she found it, a den, low, white, lined with fur and bones. Not fresh, but not forgotten. She knelt at the edge. The scent of the wolf was gone, but something else lingered. Memory, echoes, warning. She left a candle burning at its mouth, not as tribute, but as a signal. The girl in red knows. She sees you, and she walks armed. Weeks passed. Red visited often. The forest never attacked her again. But it didn't welcome her either. It watched. Grandmother healed. Slowly, quietly, she returned to tending her herbs, whispering old songs as she ground roots and dried petals. One afternoon, she said, "There's more than one kind of wolf." Red didn't answer. She only nodded. Because some things you don't need to say out loud. She learned from her grandmother. Not just about tea and poultices, but about protection. Old signs, circles etched in stone, roots that bend light. She learned how to listen, not with ears, but with instinct. And she learned how to walk between worlds. The world of those who deny the dark, and the world of those who've seen it. Red never returned to being a child. She couldn't, but she didn't grow into bitterness either. She became something in between. A girl with a name no one spoke, but whose cloak told stories wherever it was seen. And soon even the wolves learned to stay out of her way. Because not all stories end with a hero. Some stories become the thing that hunts back. The forest doesn't speak in words. It speaks in roots, in hunger, in wind that cuts sideways through the soul. And when it chooses someone, it doesn't ask permission. It simply waits for them to bleed and watches who survives. The forest chose Red. Not because she was brave, not because she was good, but because she saw the truth, that the world is sharp, and if you don't carry a blade, you'll end up in someone's story as the victim. It began with the birds. They didn't fly away from her anymore. They circled overhead, watched, cawed in 3 sharp bursts every time she passed beneath the twisted elm near the river bend. Then came the foxes. They waited near her traps, not to steal, but to follow. Even the trees shifted. She could feel it. The way the path seemed shorter now. The moss no longer clung to her boots. The brambles parted for her, just slightly, just enough. She was no longer walking in the woods. She was walking with them. One day she met the crone, a woman older than bark, skin like dry leaves, eyes white as winter frost. She sat beside a brook that only flowed during the solstice, boiling something in a pot made of stone. She didn't turn when Red approached, just said, "Your cloak is heavy with endings." Red crouched beside her. "And beginnings," she answered. The crone smiled, a mouth of missing teeth and silence. "What will you do when no more wolves come?" Red looked at her hands, at the line of faint scars beneath her sleeves. "Then I'll wait. For something worse." The crone nodded once. "Good. Then you'll survive the next chapter too. Not all wolves are made of fur. Some wear smiles. Some wear uniforms. Some hold candles in church halls." But Red had seen the real thing, and she never forgot its eyes. So when men from the village tried to escort her home one night, told her the forest was no place for a girl alone, she only looked at them the way a flame looks at kindling. She didn't raise her voice, didn't reach for her blade. She only whispered, "I've met your God before. He wore fur and bled." They didn't bother her again. She could now feel wrongness like a compass, a sickened root, a dead patch of moss, a change in the wind that meant something wasn't right. She followed it like a trail, found lost boys trapped in bogs, unmarked graves with claw marks in the bark above. She began to mark trees with red thread, symbols only the forest understood. Some villagers saw them and said it was witchcraft. Others said it was protection. But everyone knew, when you see the red thread, turn around. Something old sleeps nearby, and something older is watching. Children now whispered her name again, not in fear, but in awe. Some left her apples on stumps. Others carved little red triangles into the trunks near their homes. Not summoning her, thanking her. They didn't need to be told the tale. They felt it, because tales told with teeth leave marks. Once, the village priest tried to have her exiled. Said she consorted with shadows. Said she lured the wolf. Said no child could return from death unmarked. So she walked into his sermon. Cloak rippling. Eyes fixed. She said nothing. Just stood. Waiting. Watching. Until his words caught in his throat. And his hands trembled around his book. She didn't have to speak. Some stories silenced the rest. He never mentioned her again. At night, she sometimes wandered past the clearing, to the place where the wolf had fallen. She didn't mourn him, but she remembered him, because memory matters. And forgetting the wolf is the first mistake every village makes. She sat by his grave, lit a candle, spoke no words, and the forest seemed to nod in approval. The wolves were never the end, just the beginning, because once a legend rises, there are always those who seek to break it, not with claws, but with chains, not with fangs, but with fire. Red thought she'd seen the worst the forest could send. She was wrong. They came from the east. Not soldiers, not pilgrims, something in between. They wore armor that didn't shine, helmets with no names, and they asked no questions, only gave orders. They passed through the village like a sickness, cold, sharp, looking for things, but not gold, not cattle. They wanted stories. He was called Varn, a man of law, he claimed, tall, thin, eyes like winter glass. He spoke gently, but he smiled like a blade. We're here for balance, he said. Too many superstitions in these parts. Too many stories given power they don't deserve. He said the forest was to be measured, mapped, cut back, cleansed. The villagers nodded. They always did when men with steel smiled. But when Red passed by the square, Varn's gaze locked onto her, and his smile faltered. Only for a moment, but she saw it, and so did the forest. That night, Red walked the treeline. She found a red thread she'd tied months before, cut, lying limp at the base of an old elm. She knelt. The bark was gouged. Steel marks, shallow but deliberate. A warning, or a dare. She tied a new thread, tighter, knotted with blood from her own thumb. Then she whispered, I see you. At dawn, Varn's men entered her grandmother's cottage. No knock, no warrant. They overturned baskets, ripped herbs from rafters, called her grandmother witch, called Red unnatural. Red arrived halfway through, eyes silent, cloak still, no weapon drawn. Just a look, calm, focused. She didn't raise her voice. She asked one question. What do you fear that makes you break doors? Varn turned. Fear, he said. No, I enforce order. You are what happens when old stories are allowed to grow unchecked. He pointed at the herbs. This is not healing. This is folklore with thorns. Red stepped between them and her grandmother. Then maybe you should learn to bleed. The next night they burned 3 houses, called it an accident, blamed chimney soot, blamed rats, but everyone knew. They were homes where Red had left thread, where the woods had touched the walls, where stories still breathed. They left the ashes as a warning, but ash only feeds the roots deeper. Red didn't hide. She walked the square the next morning, cloak bright against the smoke-stained sky, and people followed, quiet at first, then louder, until Varn and his men stood alone, surrounded by silence sharp enough to cut steel. Red didn't shout, didn't strike. She simply untied a single red thread from her wrist, held it up, and tied it to the gate of the square. That night the wind howled differently. Old trees swayed, animals fled, and deep beyond the river bend, something opened its eyes. A howl rose, but it wasn't the wolf. It was the woods, answering the thread, answering the girl. By morning, Varn's camp was empty. No sign of horses, no sign of fire, just boots, dozens of them, arranged in a circle, facing inward. At the center, a single red thread, tied around a stone. No blood, no bodies, just silence. Red stood over it and smiled, not in victory, but in understanding. The forest doesn't kill to punish, kills to remember. Some stories end in death, Some end in love, and some end in a choice, to walk away, or to keep walking. Red chose neither. She did not vanish. She did not return to the life she once knew. She became something else, something between. Not a girl, not a ghost, but a boundary, a guardian, a thread stretched tight between the wild and the world. Years passed. Children grew. Seasons spun their wheel. Houses fell. New ones rose. But the forest never changed. Still waited. Still watched. Still whispered. And though no new wolf came, the villagers still told the tale of the girl in red, the one who walked alone, the one who returned, and never forgot. Her red thread ran through every home now, above doors, wound around banisters, hung quietly from lanterns on stormy nights. It wasn't decoration. It was declaration. We remember her. We respect the forest. We don't forget the teeth behind the trees. The children tied their own threads, not because they were told to, but because they felt it, the quiet pulse of something bigger than bedtime stories. Not the same one, but wolves always return. One spring, a traveler came to the village. Cloak gray, smile charming, voice smooth as polished stone. He asked strange questions, about stories, about threads, about the girl in red. He laughed at the children, mocked their mothers. He said, "Fear keeps you small. You honor shadows instead of gods. You wear thread instead of truth." He said, "The forest owes you nothing. It's time you took it back." The villagers listened. Some nodded, until one small girl stepped forward, a fresh red thread around her wrist, and asked, "Would you like to meet her?" No one remembers what happened next. Only that the traveler vanished. Only that the girl returned without a scratch. And the next day, a new thread was tied at the well, twice around the beam, knotted once, hung low, a sign that the story still lived, that red still watched. Her grandmother passed quietly, a warm hand in reds, a candle burning at the bedside. Her final words were not about wolves, not about fear, but about choice. You can stay, or you can vanish, or you can walk where no one else dares. Red kissed her forehead. I've already chosen. No one knows where she went. Some say she became a shadow, a spirit of the woods, a red blur that watches from branches and guards lost children. Others say she still walks, older now, but unbent, that she leaves red thread on trees where danger sleeps, that she marks graves no one else can see, that she whispers warnings to those who forget. But one thing is always true, she is not gone, because a story that survives the wolf cannot be buried. Sometimes, children leave gifts in the woods, a ribbon, a drawing, a loaf of sweetbread, and in the morning the gift is gone, and in its place, a single red thread, floating, perfect, uncut, and the children smile, because they know she was here. The forest doesn't forget. It remembers every footstep, every lie, every scream, but most of all, it remembers her, the one who didn't run, the one who didn't break, the one who saw the wolf and still walked forward, the one who walks between.